It came down to when somebody offers you the chance to have your voice heard and you think you can save a lot of lives and make a difference in a country, even if the odds aren't great that you'll succeed, I think you have an obligation to do it. And so early on, I'd gone down to see Jimmy Carter in February of 2002. And Vernon Weaver, ambassador, took me down there and said, "You should meet President Carter." He said, and he'll tell you should run. So I met President Carter. I said, "Well, Mr. President, I don't think I don't know if I'm well qualified to be president." He says, "You're as qualified as anybody." Okay. Well, I mean, and I guess that's true because nobody's really qualified for that office. When you get in there and look at it, it's just totally overwhelming in the complexity of it. And then, but I didn't have any money. Vernon kept telling me in the spring of 2002, he says, you need to start running. I said, "But Vernon, how am I going to run? I don't have any money to live on. I can't pay for my house." And so he said, "Well, you'll run and they'll be able to pay you out of the campaign." And so we looked at that, and of course, you can't do that. I didn't run. I did go out and speak on behalf of Erskine Bowles and a couple of other candidates the fall of 2002. And I began to speak out on Iraq. I wrote my first op-ed on Iraq in August of 2002 for the Times of London. And they called me and asked me to write it. And my wife said, "Oh, please don't do this." And she said, "Please." She said, "I know what you're going to say. You're going to make yourself at odds with the administration. Then the Democrats are going to try to use you. You're going to get sucked into all this political stuff. And then they're not going to like it in the business." And she said, "I can see it all. Please don't do this." So I said, "You know, honey, I've got to do this." So it's exactly what she said. The first thing I knew, there's Ted Kennedy quoting it on the floor of the Senate, about force as a last resort. And then I was testifying, and I'd gone to the Pentagon. I saw George Casey, who was at that time a 3-star and had my old job as J5. I said, "George," I said, "how are we doing on post-war planning?" This is September of 2002. "I mean, I know you're going to get in there and kick them out in 3 weeks, but what happens after that?" He says, he said, "Up there, they're not letting us, it's them up there, we can't." I said, "But you're not doing anything more than we did for Haiti, and that was pretty inadequate in 1994, and this is 2002, and we've done since then Bosnia and Kosovo, and you were there, you were in Kosovo with me, you know what has to be done." He says, "It's them up there." So, okay, I got it. So I testified in front of the Senate on all that stuff, and sure enough, the momentum built. And then John Kerry announced, and I didn't, and I was I talked on CNN with Aaron Brown for the war, and then I did nothing. People said, "Well, you got to announce." I said, "But my son told me he was getting married. My wife said, if you talk about one more time running for office, your son's getting married, I'm going to kick you out of this bedroom." So she said, "We'll do this after the wedding." So after the wedding, I said, "Honey, it's after the wedding. What do you think?" She says, "I'm not thinking about it right now. I'm too tired from the wedding." So the next thing that happens, about 2 weeks later, all these people on the internet start calling me, like Gordon and many other people are out there putting pressure on. It's building up. I said, "Honey, I feel like I'm getting pushed out the door. I feel like I'm being dragged." She said, "Relax," she said. "I worked on the Hill. I worked for Kay Bailey Hutchison. I can tell you it's not a draft until party leaders call you." The next day, I'm in Pittsburgh seeing the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. Said, "Congressman Rangel's on the phone." "Rangel? I don't know Rangel. I mean, he's he wasn't on the Armed Services Committee." He said, "General Clark, this is Sergeant Rangel." And so, he was the first one. President Carter called. We were about to go to bed one night. Sandy Berger called, said, "You're going to have to run, blah, 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 blah." And finally, it came down to me calling Joe Biden on a Sunday afternoon in early September. I said, "Joe, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, I think, if you get the nomination, you can beat Bush." He said, "I don't think you can get the nomination." He said, "I think you got maybe a 30% chance. It's very tough to get the nomination. But if you get it, you could win." So he said, "I think you ought to run." I said, "Well, Joe, I think you ought to run." He said, "Well, I can't. My wife won't let me." And my wife got on the speakerphone. She said, "Joe, what the hell are you doing to us?" And so the next morning she went out for a walk, and she said, "I'm giving you 1 hour." I said, "I'm tired of this. You make up your mind." She said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, because if I tell you not to run and you don't run, and then you'll blame it on me. And if I tell you to run and it doesn't go well, you'll blame that on me. So this is up to you." So I opened up the Bible. I read my favorite chapters of the book of Psalms. I put my head down, I prayed, and I got nothing. Nothing. No, there was no strong, small voice. There was nothing. And I was desperate because by that time I only had about 15 minutes left before she walked back in the door, and I was firmly undecided because it's a tremendous thing when you have never been in a career to sort of launch into it. I mean, imagine, you were in the investment banking business, somebody said, okay, kid, here's $200 million. I want it all spent in the next 2 weeks and don't blow it. You said, what? I mean, how do you do this? And so I had no political experience, no staff, no money. I went to see Harold Ickes. I'd been to see Harold Ickes. Somebody said, hey, you got to go see Harold. I said, Harold, would you help me do this? He said, how much money you got? I said, well, none. I'm not even a candidate. I'm not even a member of a party. He said, forget it. He said, talk to me after you got some money. Well, so, I mean, it was like a chicken and an egg. No money, no strategy, no staff. And so, as I was desperate there in the last 15 minutes, all of a sudden the phone rang. There was a deep male voice on the other end of the line, and it said, Wes, you must run. I said, who is this? He said, listen to me. You must run. I said, but who am I speaking to, please? He said, and he didn't say God, okay? He said, this is Tom Johnson. And he's my buddy who used to head CNN. He was a White House fellow about 10 years before me, and I've admired him for a long time. And then at the same time, my AOL chirped up with that little tinkle thing, you got mail, And I opened it up and said, don't do what Colin Powell did. He got ready to run. He for one reason or another, didn't run. He said, that'd be a mistake. He said, you need to run. About that time, my wife walked in the door and she said, what are you going to do, huh? I said, I'm running. That's how I made the decision.
Before we continue on to the next question, if everybody...
No polling. No focus groups. No strategy. No money. It was truly a draft. And you say, people said, well, it was such a bad opening. Listen, I was leading the polls for weeks. And the only time I didn't lead the polls was after the professional advisors got involved and tried to keep me off television. And I went to Iowa, and I was the only guy that got 3 standing ovations. I was the only guy in Iowa who Tom Harkin's wife watched the whole time. And my advisors persuaded me and took command and said, you're not going to Iowa because you can't afford it and you don't have time. So there's a lot of looking back on these things. It was too late to get in, but it was a wonderful honor. I loved it, and I wanted to do it again, but I didn't.
Before we continue on, if everybody could come in from the hallway, and there's there's somebody younger, there's a chair right here for you. Please, if you could come in, nobody should be standing outside. General Clark doesn't bite, at least anymore. So it wasn't the Clark bars.